Hello and welcome to Evangelical 360. I'm your host, Brian Stiller. When Russia invaded Ukraine in a full-faced war in February 2022, what I never imagined to be a major wrinkle in this invasion was children kidnapped, stolen from their parents' arms, from the security of their home and village, thrust into buses, driven across miles of countryside into Russia, where they now live. I heard this to be so, but actually standing in Ukraine, seeing it firsthand, it settled on me like a cold north wind. A shiver to think that humans in this century would actually resort to this policy as a way to dehumanize and overturn a neighbor. Yet while this was going on, my guest did something. You may have seen and heard Mykola Kuleba on CNN, the CBC, or BBC, or some news service, as he and his volunteers through Save Ukraine rescued children from their Russian captors. Today, over 4 years into this war of invasion, Mykola joins me in telling the story and giving us an update on what is going on and what we can do to help. And thanks to you for listening, for being a part of this podcast. As you listen, would you consider sharing this episode with a friend? And if you haven't, please hit the subscribe by joining the conversation on YouTube in the comments below. Now to my guest, Mykola Kuleba. Mykola, thank you so much for joining us on Evangelical 360.
Thank you, Brian, for your invitation.
We are now into the 5th year of the war since Russia invaded Ukraine. Give us an update, knowing that this continues day after day. Tell us where things are at now in your country.
You know, you mentioned 6 years, but it's 12 years as Russia invaded Ukraine, and 4 years of anniversary when Russia invaded second time. It's full-scale invasion, openly. 4 years ago, their army invaded Ukraine's territories, and right now we have a situation when Russia constantly shelling Ukraine's territories and destroying our energy infrastructure, destroying homes of millions of people, and especially now in winter time, many families surviving, having no any electricity and heaters, and we opened our shelters to bring people home, to give accommodation and food and warmth, and it's our daily life during the war time.
Mykola, you have a very interesting organization, an NGO that you set up called Save Ukraine. And I want to come back to ask how that started, but give us an update on the condition and the numbers of Ukrainian children who have been kidnapped by the Russians and moved outside of Ukraine.
Yeah, we founded this organization with my friend and brother in Jesus after first invasion when millions of families and children were surviving in the front lines, in occupied territories, and we started our rescue mission for thousands of them, and we involved many churches and Christians who helped our missions, and we rescued tens of thousands of people. It was our first experience of saving lives, and we called Save Ukraine because we clearly understood that we're saving our country through saving children and saving families. That's why even here I have name of my organization, and we telling we are save child, save family, save Ukraine. It is our mission, and in God, and is the just Ukrainians, we have to save our country.
Thanks, Mykola. Let's just stop for a moment. and drop in this video of some of your work in Ukraine.
That time I was invited by Ukrainian president to be a children's ombudsman. It is the highest position in my country for child protection, and I served 7 years as a children's ombudsman. I finished before full-scale invasion. 6 months before I finished my work in presidential office, and full-scale invasion happened, and we started our ministry again. We renew our mission, and for now we are the largest organization who rescuing the most vulnerable kids, and especially kids who've been abducted, kids who are in Russian trap in occupied territories. And for now we rescued 1,162 children from Russian occupied territories. We built underground railroad, which helping us to rescue that kids. But first of all, we finding them. We trying to find any information, because their relatives coming to us and telling, "Oh, my child was kidnapped. Can you find my child, and can you bring my child home?" And right, maybe last week we rescued we had very important case for the last 3.5 years, because after occupation of Kherson region, Russia kidnapped a lot of kids from Kherson region, and it was one baby orphanage there, and that kids were hidden in the church building. One evangelical church, after invasion, took kids from the orphanage to their basement, to bomb shelter, to save that kids from Russians. And one day, Russian soldiers found that kids in the church building and arrested pastor and took all that kids to the baby orphanage, and then kidnapped all of them to Russian territory. And they were some kids who had families, and they were one mother with the 2 kids who've been separated, and that kids disappeared, and we were fighting more than 3 years just to bring that kids home. And because Ukrainian government sent that information to Moscow through Qatar negotiation, and we were fighting for that kids, and Russians didn't want to give that kids back. But just last week, through Melania Trump's support, we received that kids back. That kids were repatriated and reunited with the mother, and they stayed in our rehabilitation center.
Mykola, I'm intrigued to know, why would Russia kidnap children from Ukraine? What's the military, or what's the strategic purpose of kidnapping children? It just seems, it not only seems awful, but it just seems bizarre.
Brian, you maybe remember Soviet times, when was Soviet regime and Iron Curtain behind the borders with all West world, and I grew up in Soviet Union, and we were isolated from all the world, and we lived in the bubble, and the same Iron Curtain descended over occupied territories, and we cannot reach that kids, and it's a lack of information, but we know through that kids who've been rescued, and we know that it's a clear intention of Russian regime to brainwash all children, to erase the identity and turn all children not only into Russian children, but into Russian soldiers. Because in Russia, they have a huge demographic problem. And Putin needs children. And he converting, especially boys, into child soldiers. And that's why we are rescuing these kids from being forcibly conscripted to the Russian army. And I can show you a lot of documents here in Kiev in our office. What does it mean, conscription? How looks draft notice for Russian army? Because when we rescue these 16, 17, 18 years old boys, they are showing us not only Russian passport, were forcibly received, but draft notice for Russian army. It's obligation of every boy to be Russian soldiers. They don't want to fight with us. They don't want to die for nothing. But they have this obligation because they stayed in occupied territories, and Putin used these kids, all of them, as a shield in their childhood. And next step is to convert them into Russian soldiers. And every school, because all school now Russian in occupied territories, have military movements, and maybe 16 or more different military movements. And Russia, through the military movements, train these children, handle weapons, and fight with us. And together with that, they have the history books totally rewritten. And you will find in these history books that the West is enemy. Russia is a victim, and the West is aggressor. And Russia is fighting with the West in Ukraine's territory. And that's why children must grow up and fight with evil West. It's the same what we had before in Soviet Union, and now Russia restore Soviet regime, and the same propaganda, maybe huge, more horrible and poison propaganda now, having social media and TV, because in Soviet Union was only one channel, but now a lot of channels, and Russia blocked any information from the West, from Ukraine, and you can follow only one Russian propaganda channel to know that Russia is a victim, and all children should stand and fight with evil West.
How many children to date have been kidnapped, Mykola?
It's hard to evaluate, and we know official number 20,000 children who've been kidnapped because Ukrainian government identify that kids, but because we have no information and no access to occupied territories. And for example, I mentioned about more than 1,000 kids who've been rescued by Save Ukraine, because we rescued the biggest number of kids. And we had these kids in the governmental database, but they've been kidnapped, and we did not know about it. And our government did not know, because the parents of that kids have been killed or arrested or disappeared, or just Russian soldiers took these kids to Russian re-education camps or military camps from their parents. That's why we are searching every day these kids in occupied territories, and we trying to build communication with that territories, with local communities in occupied territories and people who live there, just to find and rescue a child from there.
Mykola, what is your strategy? What are your tactics in locating and bringing those children back to their parents?
It's our strategy is really clear. First of all, to carefully document that kids who've been returned by Save Ukraine before. During their rehabilitation, our psychologists and the social workers carefully questioning children to find any information about that kids who stayed in occupation or trapped in Russia territory, and these kids who've been saved, giving us a lot of information about that kids who stayed in occupation and helping us to build connection with that children. And we rescued biggest number of kids, having information from rescued kids, and they helping us to build this connection.
What are the conditions that children are living in as they are kidnapped?
You know, it's hard to express my feelings because to be honest, very often I'm crying when I hear from these kids their stories. Like one boy told me that his friend was just killed before his eyes, and because Russian soldiers found a picture of Ukrainian soldier, and they just tortured him and killed him before the eyes of his friend. And we rescued this boy, and he witnessed and told us his story. And just yesterday, I was leading a panel discussion during this anniversary event together with President Zelensky, First Lady, and it was a lot of international organization and guests from different countries and our governmental stakeholders. We were together and discussing, and I invited one boy who lived in occupation, and he is deaf and mute from his birth. And he grew up in his family, but one day Russian soldiers came to his house, and his mother he lived with the mother, and she was deaf and mute as well. And soldiers came to their house and lived in their home because the mother and these sons couldn't refuse, and they even couldn't speak with them. They were speechless because they were mute and deaf. And one day, a Russian soldier raped a mother before this boy's eyes, and mother died after maybe a month to 2 months in a hospital. And then this boy was abused by Russian soldiers, and one day they killed 3 another boys before his eyes. And he was tortured by these Russian soldiers, and he hugely survived, and we rescued him. And yesterday, being on the stage, because before after we rescued him, we provided rehabilitation, and he's a strong voice of speechless in Russian trap, and he was speaking through his language yesterday, being on the stage and telling his story, and many people cried. And when you're asking me what is the trauma of these children, I'm telling you it's generational trauma, because I mentioned this story, and I have no idea if we will be able to heal trauma of this young adult. But he was a child when his mother was raped and just were killed, and that 3 boys were killed. And I can tell you tons of these stories, because every story of that more than 1,000 children we rescued, so touching, so emotional, because they have not only lost their homes, but lost sometimes relatives, lost friends, lost their town or city, and lost in education. And we are building their lives from scratch to giving them bed or safe shelter, trauma healing, food, and love, care, and God. We praying for them. And many of them accept Jesus, and they really happy to build their life together with God, with clear understanding that they are not lost. God found them, and many people who never believed before now believe and repented and full of God.
Do you go right into Russia to find children who have been kidnapped?
Oh no, it's impossible because, as I told you, it's Iron Curtain descended into that territories, and we have no access to go to Russia or occupied territories. That's why we built this underground railroad, and we finding there right people who can help, and we that people helping that kids to survive and help to bring them to the control area to Europe. And I can't tell you a lot about how we're doing this because it's many confidential things, but it's always really dangerous and complicated.
How do families respond when their child comes back?
Yeah, yeah, it's hard. I mentioned these two children who've been separated with mother, who've been kidnapped by Russians, and they were 1 and 3 years old. Can you imagine? These just babies, 1 and 3 years old, what they could know about Ukraine, about mother, about situation, and they've been placed to the Russian family, and they lived in this family more than 3 years. And these children knew that it's a new family and no mother. And this family told these kids when they grew up that you have no relatives, you have no mother. And one day when this mother came, because Russian authorities allowed her to come to that kid, and they didn't tell this kid that mother coming, and these children couldn't understand who's this lady, and only and the Russians told the mother, okay, maybe you have to get out from here because these children cannot recognize that you are mother of them. But this girl, who now is 7 years old, she was 3. But one time they said, no, I remember her. I remember we were with her, and we lived with this lady, and maybe she's our mother. And what is a trauma? And now they are building new relations because they lost a lot. It's every day of life of these children in Russia, Russian trap, Russian captivity. It's a whole life because they missing a lot. They know nothing, especially little kids. They did not understand what happening with them. Where are their parents? Because especially that parents who were killed, and children know nothing about them, and we know nothing about where they are.
Mykola, I know that you have been on CNN here in Canada. You've been on the CBC and other programs. But how can you get the word out as to how people can help in the rescuing of children in Ukraine?
Always I'm telling, don't be silent. it's a crime to be silent. And I'm so grateful that you lightening these issues, you showing through our conversation people that this world is not pink and Russia is not fighting for Christian values. What Russian propaganda says, that Russian regime fighting with the West and just killing innocent children, kidnapping them. And what can I ask people? Don't be silent. Pray for these children and read the stories. You can find these stories on our website, saveukraine.ua.org or saveukraineus.org. We have our organization in United States as well, and you can find more stories about abducted children, about religious persecution, about sexual abuse of these kids, about militarization, how Russia turning these kids into Russian soldiers. And you can know more and raise your voice for innocent children to tell these stories through your social media, to tell your friends that Russia kidnapping children. Russia is a terrorist state who every day shelling our territories. I'm in Kiev now, and many families and children freezing because Russia every day shelling our energy infrastructure just to force us give up. But we don't want to give up. We have our loving country, sovereignty, our families and children. We don't want to be slave of Russia. That's why don't be silent. Tell true. Raise your voice for innocent children, telling all the world that it's not appropriate for Russia to kidnap children, and we need more sanctions against Russia. We need more involvement of people, and if anyone who listening us can help us and can help, can donate, because we are dependent of support, and we are rescuing these kids because thousands of people around the world helping us. They donating $1, $10, $50 for our rescue mission, and it gives us fuel for our underground railroad to find and rescue more children and provide their recovery, because we're working with the local churches and we have church-based programs all over Ukraine. We built 130 modular houses. And Brian, I'm so grateful for your support, because when full-scale invasion happened, you was the one of the first who supported us, who helped us to build our rehabilitation program on the ground, to build these modular houses where thousands and thousands of children and their families after reunification lived and temporarily, and we provided rehabilitation and then reintegration to local community. And I'm so grateful, Brian, because for your generosity, and grateful that people who still with us, who standing, praying, donating, and we feel this encouragement, we feel this support. It gives us energy not to give up and move forward.
Mykola, the last time we were together in Ukraine, we were in Lviv, which is a Western city. And there was a Muslim family with a daughter who had a particular medical problem that you found medical service for. And it was interesting for me to watch you and to see you interface with this Muslim family and their need. And so I guess as we land our conversation today, what has this done for you as a person? What has come to you? What has changed you? What will you remember out of this more than anything else?
You know, it is now more than 26 years as I devoted my life to serving God. And because 26 years ago, God called me, serve him in child protection, protecting innocent children's lives. And for me, it is my life mission. It doesn't matter, it's Muslims family, Christian family, Jewish families. We rescued a lot of Jewish families and Muslim families. Yeah, and it's God's provision. It's God's goal to help all people who suffer, because Bible says that we have to help all who taken to death. All who's suffering now, we're feeling their pain. You've seen before your eyes that girl, and she needed a medical treatment, and we provide a lot of surgeries in our hospitals after rescuing kids, because many kids so traumatized, and it's not only trauma of their souls as spirits, but it's a huge trauma for their physical condition. They lost a lot, and we, as I told you, build their life from scratch, and we provide healthcare, mental health support, and spiritual support. I remember one family who was surviving in the basement of their house because of bomb shelters, bomb shelling. And I asked them, what did you do all that 9 months in your basement? With 2 children. And they told me we were praying. I told, have you ever prayed before? They told no. But how did you know that you have to pray? And told, but because we had no hope. We had no hope that someone will save us. And we understood that only God could save us. And I was driving a car with them after their saving, and they were crying and telling, we know that God saved us through you. And I understood that in that circumstances, it was only one hope. Pray and ask God about salvation, about their life in that circumstances, and millions of people in that circumstances praying, and God giving them hope and rescue them. That's why we clearly understand it is our mission, obey God and do his work, to be his hands, his legs, his eyes. And what can we do? Just to pray and help them and do what we can.
Mykola, it's quite a story. And as you continue with Save Ukraine and caring for children and families, rescuing the kidnapped, I trust that people who are watching today will be behind you and supportive of your mission, and pray for Ukraine and for its continuing distress as life goes on for many people, but praying that this war will come to an end. Thanks again for joining us today.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you. It's everybody who listening to us. I'm asking you, pray for us, pray God, follow God, and we know that God will support and protect Ukraine, and especially Ukrainian children, and we will bring them home.
Thanks again.
Thank you.
And thanks to you, my friend, for being a part of this podcast. Be sure to share this episode using hashtag Evangelical360 and join the conversation on YouTube. If you'd like to learn more about today's guest, be sure to check the show notes for links and info. And if you haven't already received my free ebook and newsletter, just go to brianstiller.com. Thanks for joining me. Until next time.
Don't miss the next interview. Be sure to subscribe to Evangelical 360 on YouTube.